Okay, things are bad. Why? And there's a lot of reasons as to why. The teacher shortage. One of the main ones is COVID, is the mental health of parents. Bigotry and racism, also the effects of misogyny. Discriminatory and hateful and targeted legislation. Point is this is dumb. Book bans. No! Pick up your fucking pitchfork and torch and fucking picket and riot. I don't give a shit. Come on! Are you joking? Fuck off. Anyway. So let's go over all the times Florida has imported that whole ocean into the sandcastle hole. The Don't Say Gay bill, increasing trends in violence. What are we protecting our kids from if it's not safe for them to learn in school? Social media, right? Told you so, motherfuckers. You're probably, or I would think, wondering, okay, things are bad. Why? Well, that's fair. And there's a lot of reasons as to why. I mean, think about it yourself. Your mental health probably hasn't been as good since COVID and in recent years. But is there one single factor? No. It's a lot of things. And sure, there's probably a good deal of personal life stuff, but there's also a lot of big picture things that are going on and causing a lot of mental health issues and causing a lot of the problems that I just laid out. So, I feel a little gassy. Okay, so the easiest one to draw connections to is the teacher shortage. Why is there a teacher shortage? Well, the teacher shortage is pretty much because teachers are kind of going through it. They're dealing with a lot and they're not getting enough back. And it's like well-known problems, like pay, benefits, all that kind of stuff. In England, there's been below-inflation pay raises over the past decade, which have meant that teacher earnings have fallen by 13% in reality since 2010? Yeah, 2010. You know, this is a known thing. Teachers don't get paid a lot. And there's also been recently a growth of charter schools. And charter schools, whatever, I don't know, they're charter schools. But they tend to strong-arm teachers more into taking worse pay. So teacher pay is not great. Then, of course, there's been funding deficits in teaching. You, of course, know the stories of teachers talking about how they're not getting enough funding for their programs or for their classes or class resources or whatever. But teachers are also feeling a lot more disrespected by, like, people in general, but also, like, parents and students. And now the student part checks out because, as mentioned previously, there's the developmental issues. And so those are causing kids to misbehave more, and that can easily be seen as disrespectful. But currently, 45% of teachers said that they did not feel respected or seen as professionals by the general public. And then also, the pandemic and COVID, it exacerbated a lot of issues that were already going on in the teaching profession and tended to stress people out more. More than half of U.S. educators say they were more likely to retire early because of COVID. I know that personally, I had a teacher my freshman year who was amazing, a great teacher. Everyone liked this teacher. COVID hit for us like halfway through freshman year. Sophomore year, the first day, he quit, I think. It was like the first day. It was like one of the first few days. Anyway, he quit. He's this amazing teacher, but it was just like the mixture of having to do online as well as in person was just like too much for him. And so he just quit. And it was like, this was a teacher who everyone liked and was also like so much fueled by students and by teaching and everything that it was almost shocking. It was like, holy shit. Then there's a lot of natural safety concerns from teachers because of things of like, you know, as I said previously about like more fights from students misbehaving more, but also things of like more shootings, because those are also going on, and those aren't great either. There's also teachers unions. They're losing a lot of power, and I don't know, recent legislation, like I know for Florida, I think teachers are like outlawed from striking because of some old contract deal. And then there's also something to be said about how the teacher shortage is a result of a lot more creation of new positions rather than empty old ones. But that's only part of it. That's not the whole thing, of course, as I pointed out previously about teachers quitting more and feeling worse in general. But additionally, There's also an increased amount of public pressure and scrutiny being put on teachers and education, like in like news and stuff. Like for a lot of like don't say gay stuff or book bans or whatever, which I'm gonna get into more. That puts teachers in the crosshairs, and it can result in disciplinary action like revoking their teaching license, which is a big deal. As I did briefly also touch on in the teacher shortage section, teen mental health is also having an impact on teachers. More than half of teachers say the current state of students' mental health is stressing educators' capacity to manage classrooms. This is not my script, is it? It's also their immaturity is tiring, as I said. And then their teachers are also not equipped with the resources or the support or the know-how as to how to help students going through mental health crises. Jumping ahead a bit, the teacher mental health is also bad for student mental health, because teachers who are dealing with burnout and stress and everything tend to teach worse. Like teachers with depression are less likely to do whole class instruction or have fewer like warm and responsive interactions with students. They tend to spend less time organizing their lessons ahead of time. 41% of teachers said they feel like they're less effective at their job when stressed. And that's understandable. Are you better at your job when you're stressed out? Probably not. And so that in turn is making it worse for kids. But that's the teacher shortage. Teenager mental health, on the other hand, does share a lot of the same root causes, but it also has its own unique ones. So some small causes as to why teens are suffering. Pop culture and media and, discourse has in recent years focused more on like self-care and mental wellness and everything, which is a good thing, but it also leads to sometimes like too much introspection where teens are not going out enough or like doing outwards things enough. And what that results in is they have a harder time feeling attached to some things and finding meaning through that. Then there's also been decreasing rates of religion in youth. I think like religious belief, not like religious culture. Like I'm Jewish, but I'm like agnostic, but I'm still like Jewish culturally. And so I think there's declining rates of like that religion side of it. Anyway, to the big causes. One of the main ones is COVID, because it's COVID. So COVID by itself, an estimated 214,000 children lost a parent or caregiver to COVID. And then also because of how COVID is/was, you couldn't do a lot of in-person things. And so this meant not as much like funerals or like those kinds of things. And so that then made it hard for some people to grieve, and they're still holding on to a lot of that. And that's hurting mental health. Then also, 29% of US high schoolers had a parent or caregiver who lost a job during the pandemic. And then, as probably everyone knows, COVID was bad for social isolation. The social isolation of COVID, it hurt people who had weaker or less connections, and like less established social circles. And the thing is with that is that I feel like I'm saying a pseudoscience, but this is real. Social connections help us like deal with shit going on in our lives. If it's like death in the family, bad news, tough times, stress, whatever. It's like having social connections and being socially connected and socializing helps. That's a thing in humans. And of course in COVID, when you're isolated, can't do that as much. And so that made it harder for people and teens. To deal with a lot of the hard shit going on. Also, in general, adolescents need like social connection. That's like a thing. I think more than like the general adult human. Adolescents like need that. It's important. Also, girls in specific need that. It's important. And then a lack of it cause these higher rates of loneliness in teens. And also loneliness has connections to depression, yeah, but also like a lot to suicide. So of course that's not good. that's quite bad. Quite is an understatement. It's very bad. But also, in terms of like the kind of mental development sort of stuff, for a lot of people, COVID took away like 2 to 3 years of their normal lives. And when you're a kid whose brain is still all broken-o, you need time to be unbroken-o. And when you're a kid whose brain is still developing, you need time to develop. And so you take away those 2 to 3 years of COVID time, kids are then, they're like 2 to 3 years behind developmentally. And that reflects a lot of what people are seeing in the academic world, in students performing worse, behaving worse. Then also, more specifically, 56% of LGBTQ youth reported that their mental health was poor most of the time or always during the COVID pandemic. A reasoning for this can be that if you're LGBTQ+, you might be forced in a household with your parents or family or caregiver or whoever who isn't supportive and accepting of you. And then as a result of being around them and being forced around them, it's worse for your mental, obviously. There are also a lot higher rates of parental abuse during COVID. This is one thing that, while I've been doing all this researching, I've seen not really talked about that much. I think it was talked about a lot at the time when these numbers did come out like a year or so ago. But there was a lot of parental abuse going on during COVID. 55%, so more than half, of high schoolers were emotionally abused by a parent or caregiver during, I think it was like the first year of COVID. So in a previous survey from 2014, like a similar survey, this was only 15.7% of similarly aged children. Then also, 11% of high schoolers were physically abused during the first year of COVID. This was 2 times higher than the similar 2014 survey. But also, as you probably know from just being a person in society, COVID itself not only was bad in its own right, but it also incubated and made worse a lot of other things. And so those other things were also their own causes of teen mental health issues. That's why the COVID, because it exacerbated so much, that's why I stuck it at the front, because everything I'm gonna say was probably made worse because of COVID. Pretty much everything. Anyway, another important factor is the mental health of parents. Depressed parents are 5 times more likely to have teens who are depressed. Now, this is important to note because depressed parents may be more irritable or whatever, some of those other symptoms of depression, like irritability, but also less outgoing and stuff. And so they may be more critical or angry or withdrawn, and teens may then interpret that as a lot of bad things, but because of the teen. And that's not good for teens. Then, also, parents with anxiety are 3 times more likely to have a teen who has anxiety. Another important factor in all this is school connectedness and having a trusted adult. That's important. School connectedness is a sense of being cared for, support, and belonging at school. It's been found to have good impact on mental health. So therefore there hasn't been a lot of it recently. Hence why bad mental health. It's a cause. Good school connectedness decreases rates of reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, rates of reporting seriously considering attempting suicide, and rates of attempting suicide or having attempted suicide. However, only 47% of youth reported feeling close to people at school during the pandemic. I'm going to read you a real quote from a teacher. Teachers are scared to make connections with students. So school connectedness is good for kids, and so it's important for kids to be able to have a connection with people at school or teachers or whatever. But that's not possible or as possible recently. For parents, most teens say that they feel comfortable talking to their parent about mental health, but 40% of teens said that they wish their parent would put in more effort to ask how they're really doing and to really listen. For LGBTQ youth, reporting high social support from their family, as well as reporting being in LGBTQ affirming schools and LGBTQ communities, corresponded to lower rates of attempting suicide. Unfortunately, Fewer than 1/3 of trans and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming. Also, nearly 2 in 5 youth reported living in a community that is somewhat or very unaccepting of LGBTQ people. So they're not getting that much needed and much helpful connection. Speaking of, bigotry and racism are also causes of mental health issues. Understandably so. Kind of makes sense. Being badgered about just being who you are wouldn't be great. In general, the effects of bigotry and racism are getting to and impacting kids at younger ages more and more, because there's more of it, of the racism and bigotry, but then also the internet and everything has made it so that it's much more known and commonly accessible and seeable. And for young kids who are just little youngins, it's understandably detrimental to them to not really understand why a person just hates them for being the way they are. 36% of students said they experienced racism before or during the COVID pandemic. The highest levels were in Asian students at 64%, as well as Black students and mixed students, both at 55%. Then also, more directly, so you're not just hearing me generalize it, children who were discriminated against based on race or ethnicity had higher rates of one or more mental health conditions. This is like 29% of kids who were discriminated against versus 18% of kids who weren't. This is a 2016-2019 study or survey, I think. But then there's also homophobia and transphobia. 73% of LGBTQ youth reported having experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity at least once in their lifetime. 65% of LGBTQ youth reported experiencing discrimination based on their sexual orientation. But also, what is important is proper representation for these marginalized groups, whether race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, whatever. Proper representation in media does help. 89% of LGBTQ teens reported that seeing LGBTQ representation in TV/movies made them feel good about being LGBTQ. I was gonna say youth, but that, whatever.
You were talking about growing up watching Disney Channel movies, and you're like, it's just so many white people.
Yeah.
And then, but you say sometimes it's not white people, and you're like, fucking thank God.
Well, it's like one of those things you don't realize that you look for diversity. And then when you see something with like an Indian person where their trait isn't just being Indian, you're like, oh shit, like this is cool. Yeah. You get excited.
I can also say, me personally, I'm a cishet white guy, but I am Jewish. And so, in media, seeing a character who's Jewish, it's kind of a thing of like, oh, hey, look, that's sick. It's neat. And I remember seeing that when watching the show and thinking, that's neat. That's cool. You feel more represented. And it makes you feel more like, all right, man, hell yeah. But I don't know if you've been online lately, but whenever there's more diverse representation in media, a lot of people tend to get mad. Hence this being a part of the bigotry and racism section. Also, this isn't something I'm going to get into too much. Mental health rates are higher a lot in LGBTQ plus groups. Like in pretty much all the stats that I've talked about so far, they also measure the rates of it in LGBTQ plus youth, teens, whatever it is, depending on whatever stat. And it's normally like a lot higher. So that's not great because they're not feeling properly accepted and they need more support. And so racism, yeah, but mainly bigotry, homophobia or transphobia or whatever against LGBTQ plus youth is not good. Because it makes it worse for them. Much worse. When they're already going through a hard time. Also, rates tend to be higher in all mental health stuff for not white youth. Not as high as LGBTQ plus youth, but still a lot higher. Because they're dealing with a lot more shit. Anyway, there's also the effects of misogyny. Now, I kind of talked about this a bit in the manosphere section, but misogyny's bad. Surprise, surprise. Not in just institutional ways, but also on mental health ways. This is an old analysis, but an APA analysis from like a while ago of rampant sexualization from women, 15 years ago, found the following effects from rampant sexualization and like objectification of them. Negative emotions like shame, anxiety, and even self-disgust was strongly associated with higher rates of sexualization. Focusing on their bodies while comparing themselves to narrow ideals was associated with, quote, disrupted mental capacity. Disordered eating, low self-esteem, and depression were also linked to exposure to sexualized ideas. Consuming sexualizing messages was repeatedly linked to diminished sexual health, sexual stereotyping, and distorted conceptions of femininity. That study, 15 years ago, was before the internet, when a lot of misogyny and objectification was just like put on overdrive. Because pretty much always, especially as I touched on in the Gossip Accounts video about like, I had a whole section on like the sexualization of women, I forgot. But like as I touched on there, everyone's going to be present online, and just your presence is going to cause sexualization, or it's going to lead to sexualization and objectification. And it's also like exacerbating normal insecurities that kids face during their teenage years and adolescence and stuff. It's like just like picking on your brain even more. Okay, this is like pretty big update. I know I'm in the dark right now, but like just going off of this and talking about like sexualization and objectification of teenage girls, there was just a news article that came out earlier today in the Wall Street Journal about a New Jersey high school who had to deal with deep faked nudes of real students that were circulating. Not to say that I was right and I predicted this, but I was right and I predicted this. But this is the world we're going into with AI and deep fakes and stuff. And so these are issues that are rampant and prevalent and going to be facing teens more and more until legislation comes along. But yeah. Anyway, speaking of structural factors, wealth inequality is also hurting a lot. 17 million U.S. children struggle with hunger, about 6 million more than before the pandemic. 3% of high schoolers lived in unstable housing during the past 30 days. Prolonged stress, like from being hungry and not having food or in unstable housing, can lead to disruptions in like emotion regulation, even in children. And so that'll really mess with them. Then also 63% of students who experience food insecurity reported experiencing persistent sadness and stress. Going back to the whole racism and bigotry stuff, there's been a lot of, in recent years, implementation and creation and enforcing and putting into effect of discriminatory and hateful and targeted legislation, like against marginalized groups. So there's been record numbers of bills being signed into law aimed at LGBTQ people in the past 3 years. Now, admittedly, most are getting overturned once it actually goes into court and a judge looks at them, but not all. Like the Don't Say Gay bill, arguably the most popular of them all, the most notable, most known. That one, there was a lawsuit against it, and the judge like threw out the lawsuit. So it's like, oh, cool. 22 states have passed laws barring trans student athletes from participating in school sports teams that align with their gender identities. To that, I show this clip of either like, I don't remember who the fuck it was. Okay, so I'm going to be honest. There's one conservative commentator clip that I kind of remember, but I don't fully remember it, where essentially they end up arguing for trans people to compete with the gender that they identify with. Wow, my teeth are really blue from that Slurpee. I don't remember if... I feel like this may not be it, or maybe this was like a clippable part of it, but this is a whole like old Steven Crowder bit from 2018 in which he talks about a female to male transgender athlete who was in Texas, and he was forced to compete with women because of Texas laws on transgender athletes. And so because of it, well, not because of it, the kid won. He won. And so this whole, like, Steven Crowder is him, like, kind of saying, like, well, you know, why? I feel like he switches in and out of remembering that this is a transgender man competing with women because he was forced to, instead of like the normal conservative talking point of transgender women competing with women. But it's like, it's this whole thing. And Crowder at this one point, when he does remember that, oh, this is a trans man who's being forced to compete with women, he says this.
So with respect to, oh, Burkott.
And you know what? They'll try and say, well, why don't you just let him compete as a male? This person doesn't necessarily want to compete as a male. No. That's the thing. When you look at when they do have the option, they try and wiggle into, as we see, there are far more examples of female.
So this is a dumb point because Mac Baggs, who is the athlete they're talking about, has, I think, repeatedly talked about wanting to play against men. Because he's a man, and so he identifies as a man. So if they're gonna find a way to wiggle out of it, then just don't let them compete and say that they're on steroids. I mean, it's just like, this is dumb. This is dumb. The point is this is dumb, and that, you know, like, just let them compete how they want to compete. Like, it's as simple as that. You're coming up with problems that you are not solving for yourself. Then there's also laws that explicitly restrict drag shows in 2 states. The 4 more states have passed similar laws, but are a bit more vague and are about, like, adult shows. But it's, like, kind of clear they're towards, like, drag shows, even though drag shows are, like, well, I mean, one, it's a pretty easy First Amendment win of, like, you can't ban those. But it's also, like, who cares it's a drag show? Who cares? I don't care. 20 states have also put into place bans or severe restrictions on gender-affirming cares for minors. Now, this is less cut and dry than, like, easy First Amendment wins, but it's still, the wins for them are rooted in hashtag facts and logic. I shouldn't fucking say that. Now, the wins for these are still likely because they're rooted in medical facts and also a lot of things of, like, I don't know, like due process, but also like parents' laws and stuff. But they're less cut and dry than a lot of, like, the drag shows' First Amendment violations, because, like, those are super cut and dry. For example, the Arkansas ban on gender-affirming care for minors violated the following. The Equal Protection Clause. It usurped the parents' rights to make well-informed medical determinations on behalf of minor children, which is implicated by substantive due process clause. I don't know what the hell that is. But it also violated the treating physicians' First Amendment rights because they just weren't allowed to talk about gender-affirming care. But then also, I think in Florida, there was a bill that was passed that blocked Medicaid from being used for gender-affirming care, and that got brought into court and it got overturned. And the reasoning for that by the judge was that it essentially ignores a lot of the risks that minors would face from not getting gender-affirming care, like suicide and depression, which are connected to not having gender-affirming care. Hormone treatment and P blockers are also used to treat non-trans children, but, like, they were cut out from the bill. And so then it's clear of, like, oh, well, it's not equal protection. The judge said the ban of Medicaid use for trans-affirming care was done for purely political reason and was using a biased and unscientific process, which is a hell of a ruling. And then all experts, like, across the board, unanimously agree that gender-affirming care for minors is good for them and their mental. Like, everyone agrees with it. Anyway, even if these bills are getting overturned, these new waves of legislation is leading to rises in the amount of hate speech and, you know, like, I'm blanking on the word, bigotry and everything online. It's corresponding because of all this culture war shit. I know that it's also like leading to kids to reevaluate where they're going to college because of the availability of like gender affirming care and like accepting communities. I have a friend who is cishet, but upon seeing the news that AP psychology was banned in Florida, was like, fuck me, I want to get out of here. And I know she was serious. And it's like, these aren't great places. Even if you're not the minority being targeted, it's still like, I don't want to be in a place that's targeting minorities. It's also led a lot of hospitals to cease providing gender-affirming care to new patients who would benefit from it. And it's also frightened a lot of families into moving or having to think about moving to places to be able to have access to gender-affirming care for their teens. If you were a parent with a teenager who was feeling, I don't know, like, I can't even imagine it, but like was feeling denied their existence every day, like there would now be this pressure and kind of need to move to somewhere where they're not feeling denied their existence every day. And that's a lot of stress for you as the parent, but also for the kid, of course. That sucks. Because if you move, you lose all your social connections, or a lot of them. Anyway, all this that's happening is really concerning and frightening to LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth. 92% of trans or non-binary youth said that they have worried about trans people being denied access to gender-affirming medical care due to state or local laws. 92%. 91% of trans and non-binary youth said that they've worried about trans people being denied access to bathrooms of their gender identity due to state or local laws. Some of the more impactful parts of these legislations are also the restrictions being put on schools, and that hurts teachers, as I mentioned previously, because it's more public scrutiny. Book bans. Book bans is a big... Book bans in U.S. public schools have increased by 28% in the first half of the 2022 to 2023 academic year. 76% of districts nationwide only banned between 1 and 19 books. This is even including temporary bans. On the other hand, there are a few districts out there who have, by themselves, banned hundreds of books. 70% of parents oppose book bannings, by the way. Just to mention it. So even if the whole thing's like, well, the parents should be in charge. Well, 70% of parents think that's fine. You don't need to be banning them. This school year, there have been 1,477 books banned, which affected 847 unique titles during the first half of 2022 to 2023 school year. Bans are, unsurprisingly, more popular in Republican-led states. About 30% of the bans are on books related to race or racism, or include characters of color. 26% of the bans are on books that have LGBTQ plus characters or themes. 38% of the bans are on books that discuss topics of health and well-being. 30% are on books that cover death and grief. 74% of the bans were connected to organized efforts, mainly advocacy groups, elected officials, or enacted legislation. That's nearly 3/4 of all the book bans were related to concerted efforts. Like, it wasn't like a book that was brought up of like oh, we should probably ban this, and like oh, get it done. No, it was advocacy groups and legislation and policymakers. The most influential of all these groups is Moms for Liberty, which has been connected to 58% of all the advocacy-led book bans in the country. So, doing the math, 58% of 74%? So let's see. So Moms for Liberty was related to 43%, 42.92% of all the book bans in the country. So this one advocacy group. Anyway, 31% of these organized efforts were connected to newly enacted state laws in Florida, Utah, and Missouri. Now, a lot of these laws that are passed have vague legislation in them. And the point of a lot of this vague legislation is that it means that teachers or librarians or whoever has to, because of such large consequences like having their teaching licenses revoked, they have to go through large efforts to censor things and to overly censor things, because to err on the side of caution, because it's their asses on the line. Understandably so, why they would err on the side of caution. Because if you look at like the Don't Say Gay bill, it's vague, because it's like it both wants to instill some intimidation, but also, make it so that's hard. Book bans will also frequently misapply labels like pornographic or indecent to justify the removal of books. But of course, when you look at it from the actual definitions of pornographic or indecent, a lot of those labels don't hold up. Most of the labels, like Mouse, the book about the mice in the Holocaust, I think there was a whole news story a while ago about that being banned in like Tennessee or Arkansas, I think, because it was labeled pornographic, because there's like and it was labeled as pornographic and taken out. What's also really malicious about a lot of the recent book bans is that they're more focused on school libraries. Previously, they would mainly be focused on like school curriculum. And so, okay, I'd be more willing to give you some leeway, because it's like, well, that's actually being taught to your kids or whatever. But it's in school libraries, it's like, that's not being forced down kids' throat. It's just there. And you're just removing it. Why? No good reason. Of course, these books are largely beneficial for kids. Maybe not for everyone, or maybe for less people, because we have cracked out brains from being online. But books can provide to some people like a safe haven, a distraction, a way to get away, all that. And, it's also good because a lot of books can provide more perspectives on things, on the world, on diversity, so that it doesn't feel as strange and unfamiliar. But it's also, for a lot of kids, it's like these books being banned isn't just a thing out of principle, it's an existential thing. Because it's like you're just being shut down from existing. It's who you are. If you're LGBTQ+, or if you're a minority or a person of color or whatever, that's who you are. It's an undeniable part of you, and it's being denied from existing. And so, of course, that also isn't great for like school connectedness, but it's also not good for your own, because then a part of you is being denied from existing, a part of your own brain, your own noggin, and that's not good for your mental. But there's also been a lot of bills recently that have forced schools to have to approve of every piece of media that teachers show. What some of this leads to is like, oh, you have to self-censor out of fear, because it's everything. It's not just books, or it's not just the way you're teaching, but it's everything. But then also, I worked at the morning news for my high school, and so I worked frequently with the librarians, because it was like all grouped together, and they were in charge of having to approve every piece of media shown by teachers. But teachers, it's like, it's impossible. You show a video in class, that has to get approved. You show anything in class, it has to get approved. That's like, it's like being set up to fail. Anyway, Florida, in particular, loves these restrictions. Or maybe DeSantis. Both. Whatever. They love these restrictions. So let me go over a few. Now, I want to note, when talking about teen mental health stuff, have seen a tendency of people to excuse bad behavior because of the circumstances. Like, I've talked to some people about, like, isn't it kind of weird how blah 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 does blah 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 here? And they'll be like, no, because it's Florida, and so they have to adhere to that, or like they whatever. And it's like, what's important is that we as a society, we live in a society, but we can't get adjusted to oppression or fascism. Not to break Godwin's law. I think it's Godwin's law. Whatever the law is online about talking about Nazis. But to break that law, that's how you end up being a, you know, like, person in Nazi Germany who's like, yeah, whatever, the Gestapo are coming to check the house. It's like, we can't be adjusted to the shit that's going on. Or we can't say, well, whatever. If we accept oppression and fascism, then not only is it bad for, like, if we're talking about it from like a business point of view of like, oh, we're bad negotiators, but it's also then we're accepting that as the new normal. And just because some people want it to be the new normal doesn't mean we should let it be the new normal, because it really fucks over some people for no good reason. Just because Florida legislation is tyrannical in some ways doesn't mean we should just be like, all right, that's the way it is. No, pick up your fucking pitchfork and torch and fucking picket and riot. I don't give a shit. Come on. Are you joking? Fuck off. God damn it. Anyway, fuck. You can't accept it, because then it's like, well, whatever. Nothing matters. Because fuck it. We're all screwed anyway. No. You gotta fucking stand up for what's goddamn right. Be a martyr once in your fucking life. Jesus Christ. Fucking hurt my toe. Got a bad toe. God damn it. Fuck. But Florida loves these. They love it. They love choking out fucking everyone and choking out any kind of like good thing. Florida legislation, they love it. They love it. They love it. They love saying, hey, this is an effort to fix some wrongs in history that have been done to marginalized groups. Let's just fucking kick over the goddamn sandcastle and say, fuck it. We're gonna make an upside down sandcastle. Where you were trying to build a sandcastle, we're gonna fucking import the goddamn ocean into it. Into that hole. Florida loves this. So let's go over all the times Florida has imported that whole ocean into the sandcastle hole that those innocent little kids were just trying to build. Anyway, hey, the Don't Say Gay video. Remember when I made that whole video about it? Not the Don't Say Gay video. The Don't Say Gay bill. Remember when I made that whole video about it? That thing I just tried to say? Yeah. Fucking Christ. The original bill is opposed by the plurality of Floridians. I had to Google what plurality meant when I read that. But essentially, it was opposed by the majority of Floridians. 49% of Floridians were against the passage of the law. You may think that's not the majority. Well, it was in this survey, you dumbass. Sorry, I'm really revved up. But it's like, most people were against it. It's a known bad thing. Anyway, the bill, guess what? You know how they were like, oh, well, fucking, it's just gonna be, taking the damn mic off the fucking stand. I'll fucking deal with the consequences of the cord flopping around. God damn it, get off the fucking stand. Alright. Remember how they said, like, hey, we're just trying to protect the little kids. You know, this is just for like 4th graders. Guess what? They extended it. Now it's not for just 4th graders. It's for everyone. 'Cause fuck everyone, I guess. I don't know. The bill was recently extended. It was extended into banning teaching of students about sexual orientation and gender identity from 4th through 12th grade. Told you so, motherfuckers. It wasn't just gonna end there. God damn it. Unless gender identity is part of a reproductive class. Oh, well that fixes things, right? No, because you can opt out of the reproductive class. And it's also like a state-enforced reproductive class. And we know how Florida is as a state. So it's gonna be the worst fucking reproductive class ever imaginable. It's gonna tell you about the storks and shit, probably. ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, those guys are pretty cool normally, except for like, whatever. They said, quote, "It was never about school children. It is about erasure of LGBTQ plus people, their families, and their existence in Florida public schools." Now, of course, this is Florida. So you know what? Pretty much any legislation means that all the research and all the findings point to the opposite to be true. That LGBTQ plus inclusion in schools and like in school climates reduces bullying and depression and suicidal thoughts for youth. Remember what this video was about how those are things that are going on that are bad? Yeah, guess what? Florida's taking steps to make them worse. Wonderful. Florida has also banned gender transition in minors. Or maybe not, I don't know. God damn it. Dude, it's hard for me to follow. Imagine if I was a trans person and I was reliant on the fucking meds. And of course, these bans on gender affirming care are against the recommendation of like everyone. Like the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. They all came together to warn, hey, this is gonna have tragic health consequences, both mental and physical. But guess what? It's Florida, so it doesn't fucking matter. Then there's also all the restrictions on race stuff and ethnicity. And so House Bill 7, it's crazy that it was just 7, ended CRT in schools. Guess what? There was no evidence of CRT ever being in schools, but who cares? It's Florida. Then there's also the Stop Woke Act, because the woke are coming. And it's interfering with culture-based teaching. Of course, research points to that being good, to connecting lives to identities. It benefits students, of course, but it's Florida. Then there's also SEL. It's restricting SEL, social emotional learning. I'll get into this more later, but that's a good thing. The Education Commissioner of Florida instructed superintendents to stop using SEL curriculum, saying it had, quote, no place in Florida's classrooms. Hold on, I have to plug in the fucking camera. Also, by the way, SEL is like one of the most non-intrusive but best ways to teach about and help mental health. Spoilers for later in this video. But Florida, of course, says, nah, fuck it. So school districts had to silently remove SEL from their websites and curriculum. And Florida is intimidating school districts by sending out emails asking if they still use things and to check themselves and everything. The general consensus about those emails, I'm not coming up with this, that it's intimidation. The general consensus was, this is intimidation. And they also, when they returned the responses it was like a survey about, are you still using SEL? YN. When people responded, the education commissioner was like, you, Miami-Dade County, it seems like you're using SEL, you better fucking check yourself. And it's like, bro. Then also now, other states are considering implementing legislation to limit SEL. And of course, as I'm going to talk about later, there's hundreds of studies about how SEL is good. And it's also, SEL, barring it, it doesn't really stop it. It just makes it harder to actually teach. These are important lessons about, like, it's social emotional learning. It's essentially teaching you, hey, here's how to be smart and safe and wise socially and emotionally. Blocking it, it's still going to be taught. It's like the basics of life, but it just limits the resources that teachers can get on it. Then also, Florida withdrew from the CDC's Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. Now that survey has been like one of the main sources I've been using for this whole video. And of course, this is despite research and everything saying, hey, pulling out of it is a bad idea. Whatever. This also apparently puts counties at risk for losing like millions of dollars in funding for mental health services. And there's also the House Bill 1467, which brought scrutiny to school libraries for reading materials and then resulted in book bans. And of course, whatever, students demonstrate better empathy and understanding of people with diverse backgrounds if they're reading about it. Of course, that's been found. And then there's also, Florida's banned the AP African American Studies, even though research found that 9th graders who enrolled in ethnic studies courses found increased attendance by 21% and GPAs increased by 1.4 points. And they also just banned AP Psychology and then unbanned it because they're pussies, which was kind of surprising because Florida will normally be really stubborn, but I think it's due to the weird relationship that the College Board has with Florida and that AP Psychology is a really popular course. Anyway, whatever. And there's also this, there's so much. There's also the don't say period stuff, which is like, it bans students from learning about menstruation until the 6th grade. And of course, girls can have periods before that. I think like they often do, like their first period. I don't know, I don't have periods. But from the researching I did, it seems like, I don't know. It's just so dumb. And of course, research points to learning about periods when you're a girl helps you know about what the fuck is going on with your body. And also your confidence. Quote, these laws do create psychologically unsafe classrooms where kids can treat one another with less dignity, increasing risk for anxiety, depression, isolation, loneliness, self-harm, and suicide. By teaching prejudice instead of perspective taking, will students be empowered? Florida's youth deserve to learn in classrooms that promote courage and compassion, not hate and bigotry. But also, not just in Florida, across the board, this is interfering with education. More than half of educators say politics has interfered with their ability to teach. 51% of district leaders reported that political polarization around LGBTQ, CRT, and or COVID was interfering with their ability to educate students in fall 2022. And there's also been upticks in threats against educators. 31% of school leaders, reported verbal or written threats against educators about politically controversial stuff since the start of 2021-2022 school year. The threats are also more common in historically advantaged districts. And of course, all this going on is stressing teachers out more. As I said, when the penalty for a lot of this is losing your license, it's completely understandable that you'd be more stressed out. Completely. Because of all this shit going on that you can't say that's been found to be good for kids, but you just can't. You can't. There's only a few more causes. We're almost done with this. God damn. Ah, fuck. So another big one that's going on is increasing trends in violence. So as I said briefly earlier when talking about suicide rates, is that in 2020 it was the only year that suicide rates were the 3rd leading cause of death. And that was because homicides had increased a lot. And so, yeah, there's increasing trends in violence. And so this manifests in a lot of different ways. 1/5 of high schoolers reported witnessing violence in their communities. There is increasing rates of sexual violence and, of course, their impacts on teens. 11% of all teens reported facing sexual violence in the past year. That's 18% of teen girls, 22% of LGBTQ youth. More than 1 in 10 girls have, quote, been forced to have sex in their lifetime. I would think that's rape. It wasn't phrased that way, and these are the smart people. But I would think being forced to have sex is rape. And then there's also the effects of abuse. And so, as I talked about, these are higher during COVID. But abuse can be damaging at any age, especially for kids who are looking to their parents for the warmth and support that they need. Compared to non-abused teens, the most abused teens report 3.5 times more or higher rates of sadness, 4.5 times more depression, 9 times more suicide contemplation, 24 times more suicide attempting, right? And they also reported 4 times more alcohol and drug use, 6 times more dating violence and school fights, and 12 times more weapons carrying. LGBTQ plus girls report 76% of abuse by household grown-ups. Of that abused cohort, 65% reported frequent depression, and 27% reported suicide attempts. Then there's also the growing and constant danger of firearms. Now, gun violence, so far this year, at the time of writing the script, the numbers are as follows. Total deaths from guns, not including suicide, is 11,433. I think this is just in the US this year. Total deaths from guns with suicide so far this year is 25,821. There have been so far this year 427 mass shootings and 28 mass murders. The number of children and teens killed, 1,072. Number of children and teens injured, 2,923. For children age 1 to 18 in 2021, firearms were the number one cause of death. Normally, in like all other years, that's been like car accidents. But no, it's now firearms. It accounted for nearly 19% of childhood deaths in 2021. Children were more likely to be killed by a gun than in a car accident. Child and teen mortality surged a lot during the COVID pandemic, but this was mostly by fatal injuries, not COVID. It was firearms accounted for nearly half of the increase in mortality in 2020. For reference, no other comparable country has firearms within the top 4 causes of mortality among children. So this is becoming especially evident in fears over school shootings. In 2022, there were more school shootings than in any year since 1999. Quote, "What are we protecting our kids from if it's not safe for them to learn in school?" Now, drills are something. They're being adopted to try to combat a lot of school shooting concerns. 95% of public school students participate in active shooter drills, and now some colleges routinely hold active shooter drills. But the effectiveness of drills is questionable. I should say, the active shooter drill industry is a part of a school safety industry, which is worth $2.7 billion. These are for-profit companies charging schools, districts thousands of dollars for their school safety programs. But again, they haven't necessarily been found to work. While I've been doing researching, I found out about some crazy shit that some school districts or companies do. Like, well, I'll say this in increasing order of craziness, and these are real, by the way. Failing to inform participants that it is in fact a drill, failing to inform participants when the drills are over, simulated gunfire noises in the hallways, and employing masked gunmen to, like, run around, I guess. That's fucking bananas. Are you shitting me? What? They're employing masked gunmen? What the fuck? Okay, whatever. But like I said, the drills haven't really been proven to be effective. Now, admittedly, this is partially because, statistically speaking, for research purposes only, there haven't been enough school shootings. Now, that's a good thing. Of course, we don't want more school shootings because of the relative infrequency of them. It's hard to prove, research and statistically wise, that these are effective. And so instead, they're more being found that there's not really any proof of them being effective. But there is proof of the drills being detrimental and bad to kids. Surprise, surprise. Who would have guessed that being in a situation where you're being told there's a shooter in the building, he's coming after you, watch out, he has a clown mask on, would be bad for your mental health? Color me surprised. Anyway, studies have found that in students after a drill, there is a 39 to 42% in increased levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. 42.1% increases in anxiety, 38.7% increases in depression. There is, admittedly, a boosted feeling of solidarity with your classmates. I wonder why. I wonder if it's a thing of, oh shit, we're all gonna get fucking killed. Let's team up to make sure we don't. And then there's some lingering of, oh, we were all a team. But there's also a 23% increase in physiological, health problems afterwards, with a 22% increase in concerns over death, outside of it, afterwards. Also, understandably, the drills have a big impact on teachers. Understandably, because it's well, shit, this is what you've chosen your profession to be, is this place where you're being told there's shooters in the walls, get down. So this is a quote from someone in a study. But they said how even seasoned teachers will break down at recess on the day of drills. There was a reporter who did one of the drills at, it was some Texas college campus, and it left them asking, quote, what kind of bizarro world are we living in where this is a normal, maybe even essential part of education? And that's a good point. What the fuck? Why is this a part of education? It's what that quote said that I said earlier of, what are we doing if the schools aren't safe? All right. All right. No, I can't hold it like this. And I have to not allow myself to look at myself over there. Okay. Well, shit. I think I'm just gonna unplug myself. All right. Hey. So, it is a lot later. Everything I recorded up till now, I recorded 2 months ago. I don't think the camera is level. Everything I recorded up till now, I recorded 2 months ago. And I recorded the rest, but the way that I was holding the microphone back then, like this, caused it so that this cord would dangle a bit and would frequently have some crunching noises. And it was frequent enough that it kind of became unusable. So here we are now, 2 months later. I am now in college. I'm in my dorm. Or actually, I am hypothetically in my dorm, because realistically speaking, I'm not allowed to have a green tarp such as this up, but we're in a hypothetical world, allegedly. So, let's get into it. I'm also in Boston, so there may be a lot of city sounds that get picked up, which is just phenomenal. Anyway, so one of the other biggest causes may not be a cause. So I should say one of the other biggest possible causes. Well, let me say it. Social media, right? It's something that has an impact on teen mental health, but it is currently unknown as to how much of an impact. It's just not definitive. It's something that a lot of blame is put on for teen mental health, but there hasn't been a lot of proof put to that blame, necessarily. So, the general scientific psychological consensus is that studies on social media's impact have been like a bit inconclusive, but there does indicate to be some negative correlation causation tendency with social media usage and teen mental health. I wrote about this a lot in my script, but like there's a lot of focus put on it, but I don't know how much of it is deserved. Because it's like, currently, for a lot of the studies, there does seem to be a negative correlation, but it should be noted that it's hard to get a lot of data. There's been negative correlation found with screen time, but screen time isn't quite the same as like social media usage. You know, like I sit and watch YouTube a lot, but that's not like really engaging with social media, at least I don't think. And so it's more of something of like, I think if you do anything in excess, it'll be bad for your mental health. I shouldn't be holding on to that because that's going to get cropped out. You know, because there was a study that showed like young adults who heavily use social media are 3 times as likely to suffer from depression. But like anything in excess is bad, I would think. So I don't know. It's also hard to get the data because, you know, moving trends and everything, like a lot of these studies are like on like Facebook, but who uses Facebook anymore for teens? As well as like, you know, companies like don't release a lot of this data very freely because it would probably be bad for shareholders. Overall, social media can be good, but it can also be bad. This has been found to be definitive. So the good is mainly that it's a good way to connect people, obviously. So 58% of adolescents report social media helps them feel more accepted. One thing that's really good about social media is that for people in marginalized groups, like Black people or LGBTQ plus people, it provides them a way to connect with others who are going through the same difficulties and same hardships, and allows them to create connections that way, which is cool. That's cool. That's a good thing, and it helps them mentally, obviously. 67% of adolescents report social media makes them feel like they have people who can support them. 71% of adolescents feel like, I think because of social media, they have a place to show their creative side. 80% of adolescents feel more connected to what's going on in their lives because of social media. Then people also will like theorize that like social media and the internet and stuff is also why kids are like having less sex and doing less drug, because it's like they have dopamine at their fingertips, they have the serotonin, they have the stimuli at their fingertips, and so it's just like content that they can be doing instead of like more risque behavior. Now the general bad is a good bit. So there's like the constant bombardment of social media. That's one thing. You know, how you get notifications, likes, as well as like how there's just like everything at your fingertips all the time. There's also a lot of bad content on social media. And so, you know, these are like promoting bad things, but also like providing kids with not so great things to see, like stuff about self-harm or stuff about eating disorders, or like trying to trick doctors away from discovering your self-harm or eating disorders, which isn't good to see. Like that's just a bad thing. There's also cyberbullying, of course. I mean, this is something that I touched on a lot with the Adriana Kutch stuff in the Gossip Accounts video. But you know, it's like because of social media, it's not like, you know, you're not separated from your bully like you used to be back in the day, where it's like, okay, you go home and then you're hunky-dory and then whatever, and then of course you go back to school and it sucks, but at least you're separated for the time. No, you're still connected, which isn't cool. No, watch, I'm not going to go to bed. 64% of teens are often or sometimes exposed to hate-based content, including racism and cyberbullying. There's also just like the inherent nature of social media. You know, these are companies running them. They sell ads on social media. They're inherently made to be addictive and to keep pulling you in and be interesting and stuff. Have you using them constantly? In the same sense, it would limit your direct contact with peers and people, and, you know, increases like your own comparison of like yourself to others. So this can cause low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. Again, I am not a psychology academic, so a lot of me saying there's not a lot of trends that have been found is just me re-saying what other academics are saying about it. They're saying there haven't been a lot of trends found. But the point is there haven't been a lot of negative trends found between, or like conclusive data and findings, whatever, about social media with mental health in the academic world and studies. However, in surveys among teens, they do frequently report it as not being great. Or there are like some other stats which are a bit concerning. 97% of teens are daily internet users. This is up from 92% in 2014 to 2015. 46%, so nearly half of all teens report being online almost constantly. This was 25% in 2014 to 2015. I should throw this away, or at least have it out of the camera shot. The biggest social media platform is YouTube, which 95% of teens say they've ever used the site or app. About 19% of all teens say they are almost constantly on YouTube. That's me. I'm part of that. Hi, nice to meet you. Hello. But as I was saying about like the screen time stuff, I don't know if it quite counts the same as a lot of other social medias, because it's like, it's speculated that you're interacting with it less. When you leave a comment, you're not necessarily expecting the person to respond and to be like, oh, how was your day? Oh, I bet you make awesome videos, And most people don't post on YouTube as a social media. So it's more of like entertainment in a way. I think similar to that of like TV. Anyway, TikTok is in second place with 67% of teens saying they've used it. 16% say they use it almost constantly. Now, 36% of all teens say they spend too much time on social media. 54% of teens say that it would be hard to give up social media. This is 58% of teens 15 to 17 and 48% of teens 13 to 14. There's also a lot of concerns about what these algorithms suggest. As I talked about previously, a lot of the manosphere stuff, but also like people with eating disorders have talked about how they've been shown stuff about eating disorders or that's like triggering to them and that's caused them to like relapse. I assume probably similar things could be said about drug addiction. Similar things could be said about self-harm. The algorithms promote stuff and that stuff's not always, or not a lot of the time, is going to be great. There have been multiple surveys which have found that teens, especially teen girls, report that social media makes them feel worse about their body image and self-esteem. Various surveys show between like 25% and nearly 50% of teen girls say so. There's also the Facebook papers, which were like internal documents by Facebook, I think, that found this about Instagram. That was what the whistleblower came out with a year or two ago when that whole thing was coming about. In a tech survey in 2020 about advice to future teens, 2/3 of teen respondents essentially said to just not use social media, or they warned against it, or they were like, it's not a big deal if you don't use it, don't worry about it. There have been a few studies which have found that people who use less social media or stopped using it altogether had reduced amounts of loneliness, depression, and anxiety. There was one about like the rollout of Facebook on college campuses, which found that Facebook usage decreased mental health on average by 22% of the effect of the mental impact of losing your job. I don't know if that sentence made sense, but maybe the text on screen makes it make more sense. However, there have been some other studies which suggest that the effects of social media are more dependent on the vulnerabilities of the teens using it. If they have depression and anxiety already, and if it's triggering those. And it's also been found that what mood a teen is in while using social media has a big impact on their mental health. Understandably, obviously. So again, it's kind of a thing of correlation versus causation, chicken and the egg. Again, to generalize, the most commonly agreed upon thing is that social media's impact is dependent on who is using it. A 16-year-old male from Indiana remarked, "I think that for some people, social media can have negative effects on their mental health, but for others, social media can make them feel more connected to those around them." A 16-year-old female respondent from Idaho commented, "Personally, I think social media is a good, bad thing depending on who is using it." So, the reason people are really speculative about how bad social media is, despite how much it's been blamed in the media and by politicians and by a lot of people publicly. I have to burp. The reason it's more speculated is because science and doctors don't exactly have a great history of correctly predicting things. You know, in the 40s, psychologists were worried children were becoming addicted to radio crime dramas. Then they were concerned about, like, comic books, and then TV, and then, like, video games, and then whatever, maybe social media now. There's also, like, at the start of the 20th century, people were worried that kids would become addicted to reading. So it's like, y'all don't have, like, a perfect track record here. So if we're talking about false panic, I feel the need to bring up Jean Twenge. Jean Twenge, as well as Jonathan Haidt, but less so him, are names that have come up a lot during my researching. Twenge and Haidt are both psychology professors. Haidt is at NYU and Twenge is at San Diego. Now, the two of them very frequently, publicly, talk about the detrimental impact of social media on teens. The two of them co-own a 327-page-long Google document that is entirely focused on compiling, citing, and making abstracts of articles and studies on the impact of social media on teen mental health. For some reason in particular, they're really obsessed with it happening after 2012. I don't totally know why. They haven't really given a full reason as to why specifically 2012, but 2012. So Twenge is a lot more outspoken, so I'm going to focus more on her. I'm not an academic, so I'm not going to pretend to have a fully well-nuanced, well-balanced opinion on her credibility. However, I will parrot some things that other people have said about her, because she's in a lot of stuff. She wrote, like, she's cited in, like, 14 of the sources that I ended up going through. I went through a lot of sources. I went through, like, maybe, like, close to 200-ish, and she was in, like, 14, which is a good amount. Anyway, so Twenge is commonly criticized for kind of, like, coming up with an idea or theory or hypothesis and then, like, finding the evidence to fit it. In one of her books, she made the argument that millennials tend to be more narcissistic and self-centered, and her evidence for this was that she cited the increased recorded usage of the phrase "I love me" in printed books over the last decade. However, someone fact-checked her and found that the phrase "I love myself," which fits more and would make more sense, fluctuated with less satisfying results, and even had a higher frequency in the 1770s than the early 2000s. So, likely what is more of a grammar change is being thought of as a societal change, at least by Twenge. She said some things, and staunchly defends what she said, that millennials are better off financially than they think because the median household income is higher than the previous generations at the same age. Now, I fact-checked her and looking at some other metrics and stuff, and that when accounting for inflation as well as additional financial burdens, that's not really the case. Like, they're not better off than previous generations. She also might be a TERF. I don't totally know. She kind of gives TERF energy, but don't totally know. Anyway, she's been criticized for all this with the main point that, like, she's jumping to conclusions, as well as, like, kind of relying on inconclusive evidence and is creating a false panic. Twenge apparently responded to a lot of these criticisms in her newest book called Generations, which is studying a lot of the differences in generations, like the generations of people. Apparently, Generations is a bit more data heavy, though from what I have read, she still does seem to be quite biased and opinionated in, like, a lot of the statements she says. So, either way, Twenge is just either, like, a prophet who the scientific community is going to be kicking themselves for doubting, or she's just a random lady creating a false panic. Time will tell. But I felt the need to carve out a section for her just based on how fucking frequently she showed up in so many of these articles. That being said about Twenge, there are a good number of credible people and organizations who have spoken out about social media, and they are saying there are negative effects to it. Like the Surgeon General recently put out an advisory about social media and teen mental health and called youth mental health the defining public health issue of our time. The American Psychological Association also issued their first ever social media guidance earlier in May. Then also 85% of teachers thought the ever-swiping nature of social media has negatively affected pupils. Still, when looking at the studies and the academics of everything, it's kind of unknown. They're saying it, sure, but they don't have a lot of proof to it, I think. The last big cause of teen mental health being bad, besides social media, is just like a general lack of hope about the future. This has been found in a lot of different sources. Students interviewed about the biggest stressors and what caused them the most anxieties it was some school district. The number one answer was lack of hope about the future. And it kind of checks out when you're also thinking about, like, you know, chicken and the egg of, like, depression and stuff. Of, like, you know, depression causes hopelessness, but, like, hopelessness would cause depression. I don't know. It does also check out when you look at the modern state of the world. There's a ton of political polarization, nationally, but also internationally, especially internationally now. And we're kind of seeing the revving of going into a new Cold War era. There's also a lot of bigoted and discriminatory trends and legislation. There's climate change. That's not good. And there's also the current economic climate and the future economic climate, and having to deal with a lower quality standard of living than previous generations. You know, they can't afford student debts or a home or healthcare or just so much else. It's not exactly the breeding grounds for, like, a great mental state. They felt unsure. That lack of confidence was really a major concern to them. They didn't feel settled in terms of what their opportunities would be as they left us. Those same students were telling us, we know we can get into a good school, but we're not sure that's going to be enough. Are we going to be all right? So that's kind of depressing, right? And you may be wondering, all right, well, shit. Are we as a society doomed to fail? No. No. Yes, no. Yes, but no. Kind of.